Hi guys, it's Sophie. So today I'm going to be doing the second half of my March wrap up, and this is going to be non-fiction etc, which is how I normally do it, and there aren't too many to distract you in here, but there are a few different kinds of things, so hopefully this is fun. Now I'm going to start by showing you a couple of guidebooks, because the reality is these probably aren't particularly interesting unless you're going to the place, but what I thought I would do is try and give a bit of a comparison between the two types of guidebook, because I have read them cover to cover and whatever. So the first one is the DK Eyewitness Guide to Stockholm. Obviously the Stockholm one might not be particularly interesting, but I think this gives you a lot of information, a lot of historical information, and really this gives you all of the touristy things that you could possibly want to do, and I think it's a fairly solid one to have, and there were a few things in there I used, but for me I couldn't connect with the stuff that was in here. I use it as a map and I use it as more of a reference, and to be perfectly honest, I liked the map, but I probably could have just bought a map. The rest of it was, you know, I guess fairly useful if you're trying to plan your trip beforehand, but to be honest, things like a layout of a museum, for example, you can kind of figure out whether you want to go already. Like, you can just look it up online and see what kind of things they're showing. I didn't love it, but then it's not kind of the kind of thing I would. I think it was vaguely useful, but I don't know. I think it's these kind of guidebooks feel a little bit old-fashioned to me. Like, I don't really know how useful they are. The map was brilliant. The map was really nice and really nicely coloured as well. But beyond that, I didn't really like this one. And then the next one I have is a completely different kind of guidebook and much more my kind of thing. And this one is Lost in Stockholm. This is part of a series. This is issue 10. They're really, really tiny little guidebooks, but do you know what? This is exactly what I was wanting. This is essentially a number of different creators in the city who live in the city or have worked in the city, for all different kinds. There's writers, there's poets, there's musicians, artists, painters, and they come together to think about what their favourite things are, and it's a really nice way of seeing a guidebook and a city. They do have loads of others. I don't think they have a listing in here, but they've got it on their sites. Yeah. And this gave me a much more intimate picture into the city than I think any other guidebook would have done. I really loved it. If you're planning a trip to somewhere where one of these exists, pick one up. It was kind of, I think it was about £10, which seems expensive, but it was really worth it. And it's only a tiny little book, but genuinely this is a really nice thing to own as well. And I did a lot of the things in here and very few of the things in the boring guidebook. So yeah, I think this is absolutely brilliant. And if I went anywhere else that has one, I'd definitely try and find one. So there's my 2 cents. So congratulations for those of you who've made it through the guidebook section. Thank you for staying with me. The next one I have a couple of plays actually. It's a bit unusual for me. I've got three kind of plays. The first one is 448 Psychosis by Sarah Kane. Now, I've spoken about this one a fair few times before. I read it a lot. I read it at least once a year because I love it, and it's a play about mental illness really, and I read it when I'm really low because this is a mentally ill person who has depression like at the lowest, and someone who has psychosis at the lowest, and there's something really comforting about sometimes revisiting stuff when you're down and feeling like they get stuff that feels like you're the only one who's ever had it. And I've read this book so many times. Like, I know this is depressing, but stuff like that. There's a thing here, like she's in her therapist's office, and every time she says something, he's silent and he won't talk to her, and eventually she says, okay, let's do it, let's do the drugs, we'll do your chemical lobotomy, shut down the higher functions of my brain, and perhaps I'll be a little bit more capable of fucking living. And like, I want to see this performed so badly. I'm sure last time I talked about this, because as I say, I read it like every year. Someone told me there was a version of it on YouTube, and maybe I'll go try and find that tonight, but I love it. If you have mental health stuff and reading about it doesn't make you feel bad, even if it does, like, go read this. I think it's fabulous. The next one is technically a screenplay, and this one is The Gardener's Son by Cormac McCarthy. This is the first McCarthy that I haven't really enjoyed, to be honest, which is a shame. because I thought I was really gonna love it, and I got this for myself and read it as like a bit of a I'm feeling rubbish time book, and it was just kind of meh. It's essentially about like a dispute between two men, kind of like that's like vaguely what it's about. It's about like two families and about the difference between like a worker and an employer, and sort of the relationships between these two families and two individuals specifically. I mean, it's McCarthy, so the dialogue was fantastic, but I just didn't really love it. It didn't really stay with me, it didn't really stick with me. Maybe I was unfair because I was reading it at a time when I was feeling a lot of stuff, and sometimes I don't concentrate as much, but I just didn't feel that I got there with any of the characters or the storyline. Whereas stuff like the like Sunset Limited, like I love that. And it's kind of similar in tone, so yeah, I didn't really love The Gardener's Son. If you were thinking of picking up a McCarthy, don't get this one. And the next one's another play, and I really need to watch the film that's been made of this, because that's what made me like pick this book up so urgently. But this is Fences by August Wilson, and this play was a really like honest and rough depiction of like what like African American life was like in the section fairly shortly after slavery, but where there was this kind of veneer of things having just changed. So I'll try and give you like an example from the play, okay, so there's a guy who has like worked his whole life to be a binman, and like that's his way out, that's his money, and that's his like manhood and how he feels important and how he supports his family. And as you go through, you find out that like only the black guys empty the bins, and all the white guys drive the vans, and he goes through this whole process of trying to become a driver and eventually does it, and all the black guys are like, why do you rock the boat, like we've got a job, and they kind of give it to him because they know if they don't it will cause fuss, but they don't want to. They feel as though it's better that the white guys drive the vans, and I know this obviously still racial tensions, I'm not pretending like everything's perfect now, but it was just a really interesting play around that time, and I guess about like when things are so hard, like how do you be a good father, like what makes you a good father and what makes you a bad father, and like when things are really hard you can be so harsh as to almost seem abusive. I think that's one of the things I found really interesting was I think my sympathies changed a lot during reading this play. I'm really interested to see what I think when I watch it, because I tend to have a bit of a different experience watching things than I do reading them, and I feel I might feel differently about the characters having read it once through now, but we'll see. So I think this is one I'm definitely really looking forward to watching. The trailer looked incredible, so if anyone's watched it, let me know if you thought it was good, because I'll try and do that in the next few weeks if you think it's good too. So that's the last play I read, and now we've got some non-fiction. So the first one I'm going to go over just very briefly is What Works? Gender Equality by Design by Iris Bohnet. This is one I read sort of ostensibly for work, though it was quite enjoyable as well, to be honest. And this is probably interesting for those of you who are interested in gender studies but who want a slightly different perspective. Maybe you've read quite a few feminist stuff and you're kind of feeling like it's a little bit samey. I know I got to a little bit of an extent with that when I was reading a lot of it. This is talking about the workplace, and this is talking about how employers and organisations and systems can be improved to negate the detriment that can be suffered due to gender inequality, and it's really bloody clever. The example they give throughout, and I think it's a really nice way of highlighting it, is the way that when a hotel wants you to turn out the lights, they give you a key that turns on the lights, so if you leave you either lock yourself out with the lights on or you turn the lights out. And it's that kind of thing where you say you're not even going to get a chance to be an arse about this, or you're never going to get a chance to be an equal, because you designed it so cleverly that actually you don't get a choice. And to me, whilst I'd love to think, you know, let's all be good people and everything will change, if there's a thing that can stop it quicker and can build in like a societal acceptance that people are equal, I'd rather do that. And I just think this is a really, really clever book. I really liked her writing. She quotes a few things that are really like familiar to me as well, and that was nice. It is fat. It is quite a fat book. But I found it really entertaining and really interesting. Some really cool little stories about gender that I'd never heard before because it comes from such a different perspective. So things like I didn't know that Coke Zero and Pepsi Max were called that because men wouldn't buy Diet Coke and Diet Pepsi. I didn't know that, and I love that. I love that. That's a fact I just love, and it's full of little things like that. And it backs up with all the research because it's a little bit more of an academic text than some of the other stuff you might read, and it's just fabulous. So if you're interested in gender studies and employment, then this is one that you might find up your street. And the next one is one that I read in anticipation of going to Sweden and read sort of throughout the time I was there, and that is Fishing in Utopia, Sweden and the Future That Disappeared by Andrew Brown. And this is kind of like a travel memoir, kind of, but he lived in Sweden. Like, it's kind of hard to explain. So basically this guy moved from the UK, moved to Sweden, found this like idyllic, it's a lot about fishing. Be warned, fishing, there's a lot of fishing. And he goes and he fishes a lot and he loves it. And then Sweden kind of changes, and Sweden stops being this like socialist utopia that he imagined it to be, and it becomes like more capitalist, and it becomes more individualist, and over time he watches what was his Sweden of his like youth change, and he ends up going back to the UK and then sees Sweden from afar, like as a foreigner again. And he's writing about the country and about the way that country's changed, and about his life with that country, and how our identities change when we move. So it's really interesting, and I think this is a really valuable book to have read because I was travelling to Sweden, and gave me like a far better understanding of what kind of, like, even just the feeling, like it gave me a lot of background, which was really valuable. There's too much fishing. If there was less fishing, if there was even 50% of the fishing that was fishing, I would recommend this. As it is, it's hard because it's a really interesting book, and it's the kind of thing that I think is good fun. But maybe some of you love fishing, but if you don't like fishing, it's a little heavy on the fishing. That's all I'm saying. It's just a little bit heavy on the fishing. You'll make your own minds up. And the next one I have is Failed States by Noam Chomsky. Now, if you've been here a while, you'll know that I've been fighting with Chomsky for a little bit of time because I kept trying to read him and I kept finding it really hard. And I think Chomsky is hard because I don't have as in-depth of a political knowledge as I should about the world in general and about the history of the world in general. And it means I have to stop reading Chomsky often to go and learn about what it is he's talking about. And it means, it probably means I've read the book fairly well because it means I follow all of his references, and it means I go down these little rabbit holes. But it's really hard work for me because I don't know an awful lot, and I think to read Chomsky and get a lot out of it as an enjoyable, easy read, you need to know a lot about world politics, and also have the same kind of worldview as he does. And it made me feel a bit stupid, to be honest, because you kind of realise how much you don't know and how many, there are only so many things that you learn about in school, and most of them tend to be around your own country, and to have example after example after example of other regimes or other leaders or other countries or other conflicts, and to know you've never heard of them again and again because there's hundreds, can feel a bit weird. But I do think his writing is interesting, and for me he's a way of seeing like how far left do I go, almost. Yeah, it was interesting. He has some views I don't share, and he has other things that I think he's really persuasive on. I'm not going to go too much further into it than that, but his persuasiveness is because he backs up everything he says with a reference. So he is meticulous about having a link to why he said something. If he says a fact, you know that you can go and trace it. And what it makes you feel, I think, when you read a book like that, is that you're in safe hands, like this person has spent the time. And I really did appreciate that, and I think it's an important kind of book for me to read. I'm not going to be picking up any more Chomsky soon, just because I did find it quite hard going. And I feel like I learn better about not new, but you know what I mean, like things that are new to me. I quite often learn better by reading a little bit of fiction about them and getting a little bit of a personal sense of that situation, and then going to non-fiction and then diving in. If I dive straight into the non-fiction, I get cold, and I don't feel as though I personally relate to what's happening, and it just becomes facts and figures, and that's fine. But that's not how I want to relate to my non-fiction. I always want to keep the people in mind. So no Chomsky again for a minute or two, but I do think it was good that I read it and important that I actually gave him a proper shot. And the next one is a really important book, and I'm really glad that I read it, and it's I Saw Ramallah by Mourid Barghouti. And this is a book written about Palestine by a guy, a poet who grew up in Palestine and lived there and had his whole life in Palestine, and just by dint of a circumstance of his study and his terms and his university times, found himself in exile from Palestine for the majority of his adult life, and he built his life outside, in exile essentially from his country. And it's about him coming home and about how much of his home had changed, and it's just a really powerful book. It opens with him crossing this bridge, and this tiny little wooden bridge, and he can't quite figure out that on both sides there are these massive like guarded entrances, and it's such a small bridge, and it's the only thing that's separating him from his home, and he's not been able to get back and see his mother in like 30 years, and it's just really powerful. And like even now, like I'm getting a bit like emotional like thinking about it, but it's just really touching and really personal, and it speaks a lot about home and about what home means to him, and like what his losses have been, I guess, like his personal losses. It's the first book I'd read specifically from the Palestinian point of view on that particular conflict, and it was different to what I was expecting, I think is what I'd say, and I want to read more by him. I'd like to read some of his poetry in translation if I can find it, and I think he's written a follow-up as well from memory, like a second one which is talking about the time, how he's been like since living there. I'm so sure I saw that, but like how living in Palestine for this extended period of time, having been gone for so long, what that's like. So I loved it. It's well worth a read. One of my 12 important books. This is number 3 on my 12 important books of the year. And then the very last non-fiction I have is Against Elections by David Van Reybrouck. This one was a bit weird. I had fun with it, but I don't know that it was quite what I was expecting. So this is essentially talking about re-engineering the entire democratic system to a mixture of random lot drawing and election. And it gets complicated. Like we've got some drawings in here. We've got some fairly like substantial drawings about. Let me try and see if I can find you a drawing. I'm feeling very relaxed right now. I think I've just reshuffled my position. I feel very chilled. We have these kind of drawings here, like explaining. God, it's a very hard book. Kind of explaining like the way he envisages it working. And I underlined a good deal, and I engaged with this book fairly well in terms of like writing my own notes and having a conversation with the book. I think it's got some really good points. And some stuff to kind of think over and to think about the way in which we do our elections now. But I think it's really idealistic. I don't think it's actually going to work. I can see space for some of the things he's saying. But I think it works in theory, and I doubt it would work in practice. But yeah, it was an interesting one nevertheless, and a really snazzy cover. It's one of my new favourite non-fiction covers. So those are all the things that aren't fictional that I've read in the month of March. It's been a really, really busy reading month for me. Man Booker months always are, because I sort of push myself to read those, and I want to read and get on with my TBR, so I tend to read a lot more. April will probably be a bit slower, I expect, because the Man Bookers are slowing down now. That I'm not as excited for the ones I've got left as I was for the ones I've started out on, but that's fine. Hopefully you've enjoyed this and hearing me chat about what I've read. As always, let me know if there's anything in there that appeals to you. Let me know if there's anything in there that you've read, and I'll see you soon in my next video. Bye guys.